Welcome to another episode of Silk and Steel. Today is March 15th, 2019, and this is your host, Karl Za. Today we have a very special guest, all the way from Chicago, yes?
Yes, Chicago.
Yes, so we have none other than the English translator for the Karl Marx anime that China has made, and which is now available on YouTube. I see it has more than a few thousand or tens of thousands of views. And it's all thanks to you, Mr. Feiyang. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so Mr. Sun, I found out about you initially on Facebook because you post a lot on Facebook and you have a very funny meme page. May I introduce the name of the meme page?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead. What's it called?
And so the page is called President Xi. Please delete this account. It's not just me, by the way. We have a whole team of moderators there that post. I actually just joined this page late January, but it's also been a lot of fun. We've been posting the translations of the Marx anime there. So yeah, please give us stop by and visit. I promise we post a lot of fun things and interesting things there.
And what kind of stuff do you post on that meme page?
So I think there is definitely a China focus there. There's a lot of China related news, but it's a little bit more international than that. We also post general I would say Marxist Leninist related things across the globe, including Venezuela, also the Middle East. So it's a pretty broad scope, although I would say most of the posts do relate to China.
Okay, so now before we get into the China-made Karl Marx anime, I'd like to ask a little bit about yourself, your background. What got you interested? I mean, in China, you are obviously a Chinese American. Were you grew up here? When did you come to this country?
Sure. So I'd say my experience is a little atypical for most Chinese Americans. So I came here before I was one. I was only about 10 months old. I grew up between Chicago and Kansas City, and most of my schooling, like primary education, was in Kansas City, and not a lot of other Chinese people around. But I had a lot of exposure to Chinese culture, really through my dad. He traveled to China often. He would bring back these they're called 小人书, but like little books, serials from China, a lot of TV shows.
It's like comic books, right? I mean, I just call them Chinese comic books because that's kind of what they are.
Yeah, like comic books. Right. But much more text heavy. Like there's just one image and then the text is all at the bottom. There are no speech bubbles or anything like that. So a little bit different. Mostly they're all on historical topics. There's the spring and autumn period, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the True Han contention. There's a lot of history stuff. My dad's also into history as well. So he brought back a lot of these TV shows as well. So I was always interested in sort of Chinese history, Chinese culture as a kid. It stayed with me. And in college, one of my majors was East Asian languages and civilizations. And I took a lot of generalist courses, but my main focus was Ming and Qing literature. And that was what my bachelor's thesis was on as well. I don't work in that field anymore post-graduation, but the interest has stayed with me. So I'm still reading a lot of books on that area, and I try to keep it up to date with Chinese news, Chinese politics as well.
I must say like you say, you are very atypical because a lot of the Chinese American kids I know, that even the ones who came to this country when they're 8 or 9 years old, by the time they're in their 20s, they pretty much cannot speak Chinese anymore. Many of my friends are like that. I don't know if it's just a function of my generation, because I'm a little bit older than you. As we talked about a little bit earlier, I came to this country in 1990, and as a 13-year-old. At that time, China was still very poor. Most people even Chinese Americans, they rather probably not want to be associated with the old country. And so, yeah, like a lot of Chinese parents, they don't even bother teaching their kids to speak Chinese because the pressure was really to assimilate, to the American mainstream culture. And a lot of the Chinese parents thought that, the way to do that is to make them just basically English speakers, right? So I'm actually
Yeah.
surprised that you've been basically brought up here all your life, are still, so you're not only fluent, but you can read and write as well, yes?
Yeah, read and write, and we did a lot of classical Chinese in college as well. So with older documents, it may be a bit slower, but there is some level of proficiency there as well. So if we're ever discussing any older topics, there definitely is a little bit easier for me than
I must say I'm impressed. Because I almost thought, just based reading from your Facebook, I thought you are similar age as me, and maybe you also came to this country as a teenager, so you already built up your Chinese fluency and understanding of Chinese culture. But the fact that you grew up here and now knowing what I know, I'm wow, you know your stuff. So I think this is a good time to transition to talk about the Karl Marx anime that was made by China, of which you are the main translator to make it available into English. There's right now all 7 episodes has been made available and uploaded on YouTube, and you subtitle all of them. So first, let me say thank you and great work. Then let me ask you, how did you even get into that?
So, I saw the news articles about this anime being released, maybe back in December when it was first announced, and that was on the South China Morning Post, which is my daily hate read. I think 80% of my posts are just links from them. Usually I vehemently disagree with their opinions, but they are one of the few English language, Asia-centric news sites out there. So I do read them every day. And, I was like, hey, that's kind of interesting. I'm not really into anime. I'm not really into cartoons, but, it's cool that they're doing that. And we had posted that news, on our Facebook page, and there was quite a big response to that. There was a lot of people excited about it, and there were a lot of requests for, hey, do you know if there's going to be English subtitles for this? Do you know if it will be available on YouTube? And, when it was first uploaded to YouTube, I checked like the 4 or 5 channels that had it uploaded, and no one had any subtitles. And I had some friends who asked about it, and I was like, okay, well, I guess it's only 20 minutes. I guess I could do it. It's not that difficult. So I took about takes me about maybe an hour and a half for each episode. So it wasn't that hard. But I'm really glad I did it. There's now 7 languages and subtitles available, at least for episode 1, and those were done basically by taking the English subtitle file that I created, and then people would translate English into their language. So we also have French, German, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, even Turkish available, which I think is quite amazing. It's a testament to how interested people are in the life of Karl Marx, which I think is pretty cool.
I mean, I was surprised. I mean, initially when I first heard the news, I thought, oh my God, it's going to be like really cringy and really preachy, like I'm expecting those kind of, like old style Chinese propaganda cartoon made for children, like really preachy, and really hollow and just like, I expect it to be a cringe fest, to be honest. And I have to admit, I was pleasantly surprised. Granted, I didn't have very high expectations, and also I am a Chinese speaker, so I must say your English translation is excellent. I don't know how you did it, but it's great job. You were cranking them out like almost 2 days after they've been uploaded to YouTube. And as far as I can see, they're perfect.
No, I'm glad you appreciate them. It's translation is something that like we did a lot of in college. So, it's, and that's all like older stuff. That's stuff from, 500 years ago. So, a very recent anime production, like the dialogue there, nothing is really that difficult. And the nice part about translating this is a lot of the dialogue is just word for word from a lot of Karl Marx's writings. So all you need to do is just find the English text for that, find out what part of, the Communist Manifesto or, Engels' Condition of the Working Class in England, and you just copy and paste that same section. So, I was able to cheat a little bit there too. So if you thought some of those phrases were very cleverly written, that wasn't me. That was whoever translated Marx and Engels back then.
That's funny because there was a guy, a professor, who tweeted about the Karl Marx anime, and one thing he complained about in his tweet was actually, oh, how could they, try to fit this clumsy dialogue into this anime?
Yeah, it's not very baihua. It's not very colloquial. If I had to write it, I probably wouldn't have translated it that way. But it's the accepted translation, and I felt it was appropriate to stick to that.
And also, I must say that was faithful to the original material, because a lot of the dialogue in the anime, to my surprise, actually came from either Marxist writing or it was well documented, right? I mean, it's like they just didn't make it
Absolutely.
up. Now, what? This really speaks to the change in times, because I remember when I came to the United States in 1990. I mean, Marxism is like deader than dead, and to like it's a totally different environment now. Again, time have shifted. Back then, 1990, that was like collapse of Soviet Union, the end of evil empire. It was the time of Francis Fukuyama, right? The end of history. Oh God, I hate that book. The time has really shifted. I'm surprised myself to see that shift. And now there's a lot more young people, interested in Marxism, and at least, like not opposed to it, right? I mean, how did you came into, how did that spark your interest? How did you get into it?
So I think it's just a matter of practical results. The first time I went back to China was in 1998, and both of my grandparents, live in pretty rural parts of China. Like you can just tell by the place names, but my paternal grandparents live in a village called Hotogo, and my maternal grandparents live in a place called Xiaotianzhuang. Like, and for Chinese speakers, you just hear those names, and you can immediately picture, like, that's got to be some really, really rural place out there. And
Yeah.
it was very different from the United States when I first went back. And then I went back again in 2001. I went back again 2005, 2008, and 2012. And so, in every time I go back, it's just amazing how fast things have changed, how fast places have developed. And that's not just Shanghai, Beijing, but even like, little old Xiaotianzhuang, Hotogo. They've come a long way since 1998. And that's just incredible to me. And, when I was younger, I kind of just accepted like, oh, this is because, China has opened up and reformed and they've just become capitalist, and now they're getting rich too. But, the more I read about it, the more I think about it, it's like, that's why isn't that level of poverty reduction, that level of development happening in supposedly capitalist countries, in other places of the world? Why isn't India developing like China is? What is China doing different than, say, Indonesia or Brazil that, has allowed them to have such a miraculous level and rate of poverty reduction? And, digging into that, I think it's not quite as simple as just, oh, they became capitalists. So I think that's really what started it. There are other things.
I'd like to interject
Yeah, sure.
for a second on the same topic, because it's a very common refrain among especially liberals in the United States that, China developed because it's not because the effort of the Chinese government. It's rather that the Chinese people were liberated from the previous restrictions, so they were able to finally allow to exercise of freedom of a offering a capitalist economy, right? And for me, that's just so.
It's stupid, and it's such a widespread view.
I don't even know where to start. I try to combat it. I put out a tweet. The Chinese have always known to be hardworking, right? It's not like the Chinese people of the 19th, early 20th century were less hardworking than they're now. And what have that gotten them back then? It was a horrible, horrible 150 years since Opium War. People don't explain, oh, okay, well, yeah, Chinese people are naturally enterprising, entrepreneurial. Well, so what happened in those 150 years? That was.
No, I completely agree. And it's, like you said, it's a very widespread view. Like even the Jacobin founder, like Bhaskar Sankar, he was on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago, crediting China's poverty reduction to neoliberalism of all things, and that is the founder of one of America's, premier socialist magazines. So it just goes to show like how widespread like this line of thought is in the United States. And it's just, it is pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the lack of knowledge about China in general, that infects across the political spectrum in the United States. A lot of times when people are talking about China, they're actually not talking about China. They're using China as a foil to talk about problems in the United States. And this is not even a new modern phenomenon. I mean, I read John Fairbanks. I read older generation of China scholars. They all talk about this issue. Like a lot of the old European literature, like even people like Hegel, Max Weber, right? And people use China as a foil, right? Like they're talking about the idea of China, as opposed to what's going on in the West, but they actually don't really have real first-hand knowledge of China. What they're describing is a China that was constructed from stories being carried back by travelers, much heavily embellished. This is like imaginary China, right? I remember in 1990 when I first came to the United States, I was 13, so I'm always hungry for news from the motherland, right? So I would just comb through all the newspapers for any kind of reporting on China. Like I used to deliver New York Times when I was 15, so I have a chance to read NYT every day. What I found was like, oh my God, the China they describe looks nothing like the China I just left. I mean, like, I don't know what China they're talking about, but that's not my lived experience. And that hasn't really changed that much since then, I must say. I mean, the reporting is a little bit. There's more reporting of China now just because, the China is more important in the world stage. So now you have more China reporting, you have more China reporters, and you even have more China reporters who have lived in China and even speak Chinese. But I must say, overall quality.
Yeah, I mean, like James Palmer speaks Chinese, but what has that done for his quality of reporting, right? Like it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problem is they cater to what people like to hear. Right. I mean, you have Gordon Chan, right, who has wrote about the coming collapse of China in 2001,
But you got to feel bad for Gordon Chang. Like you saw his video on CBC, right? And he talked about how he always get bullied and picked on as a kid for being half Chinese. So I feel like there's a lot of internalized self-hate there. So I can't help but feel a little bit bad for him, versus say like James Palmer. But yeah, he's such a clown.
Yeah, I don't, because guess what? That was like over half a century ago. I mean, like what happened? I mean, sure, yeah, I feel bad. He was bullied as a kid, but come on, he's like what, 50, 60 now? He should have known better, and that's no excuse for what he's doing, because he's like basically shelling for the neoconservative foreign policy nowadays. I mean, he's a North Korean expert, and as far as I know, he doesn't speak a word of Korean. I mean, I don't know how he made that transition. Just because his dad is Chinese, somehow he must be an expert on Korea. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's good enough for the mainstream audience.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he's still been like quoted as a China experts in a lot of the American media. I mean, it's just amazing to me. This guy has been wrong for how many years? I mean, since 2001, right? That's when his book Coming Class of China came out. Now we're in 2019, and this guy is still being feted as a China expert. In fact, I quoted, I tweeted out a few days ago that he was interviewed by Breitbart of all publications.
Oh yeah.
And in it he says, "Oh yeah, China's growing power pose an existential threat to the United States." I'm like, dude, just a couple of years ago you were saying China is still collapsing, you know? What the hell? I mean, like, it's just amazing, like, China can be simultaneously collapsing and yet, like, posing existential threat to United States. I mean, like,
And I think that's, that's really why I post so much. It started with me just, we used to subscribe to The Economist. We don't anymore. But I used to read their articles, and it would always just be so frustrating. Like, whatever China does, they will always find the negative angle on it. Like a post I shared yesterday from CNBC, they said, well, actually, China's pollution fighting that they did last year is actually masking how bad their economy really is. Right? So you remember a couple of years ago when there was really bad smog in Beijing, all the articles they had about the air pollution there. So, look, the people obviously cared about that. The Chinese government responded, and now that's being spun as, well, this is actually just a very clever way to hide poor economic performance because of, the trade war or something. So it's just silly because no one actually bothers to call them out on this, right? There are so many articles on China every day. There's just impossible to keep track of all the different lines. So they get away with it because.
Speaking of which, of a very recent happening is Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, right? It was carried out by a
yes.
white Australian racist fascist who self-declared as such. And I think in one of the statement he issued was that, I closely identify with the political and social values of People's Republic of China, right? And that was kind of picked up by a lot of liberals and conservatives and all the ghouls in the media saying, "Oh, look, China. Of course, China's it was his dream state." And I'm shaking my head here because, look, I don't know if this guy has ever spent a day in China, right? Like, what does he know about China? What he does know about China is mostly probably been spoon-fed to him by all the reporting in Western media. And I mean, right now, the Western media is hell-bent on portraying China as a fascist dictatorship. And they apparently did a great job brainwashing people into thinking that. And wow, is that surprising? A self-declared fascist would identify with what Western media paints as a fascist dictatorship? I mean, come on, like, this is not again, it goes back to what we talk about, right? It's never really about China itself. It's about people's own perception, their ideas of China. That exists only as an imagination. And that's one of the reasons also I start this podcast, because like you said, I feel like there's very few knowledgeable and just non-biased source out there. It's getting, especially now, because as China became more prominent in the world stage, and currently U.S. government is especially certain people in the U.S. government, the national security wing of U.S. government is hell-bending on starting Cold War 2.0 with China. Right. I mean, that ties into with all this reporting on Huawei, supposedly the China hacker threat, and the how the Chinese surveillance state is gonna doom us all. I mean, basically, South China Sea is just too far remote for most Americans. right? What do the most American care about? They care about their privacy. Okay, let's talk about Chinese hackers. Let's talk about Chinese spies, right? I mean, God, I mean, even like it got to the point where you have the director of FBI saying China poses a whole society threat. Right now, they're talking about like how Chinese students inside United States are potential like fifth column, potential spies for the Chinese government. And I'm just flabbergasted because that hits home because my parents came to United States as students. My dad came here to pursue his PhD in electrical engineering, right? And now that was like back in the 80s, and now they're saying basically anyone who has Chinese heritage is a potential spy, right? We're getting to that. I'm surprised actually how quickly we're getting to that level of debate. But yeah, so I'm glad that you have that very funny meme page to fight all these disinformation and fake news. But let's get back to Karl Marx anime because I'm sure that's what a lot of people would like to hear more about. I'm personally really surprised about the interest in Marx, Karl Marx anime. Like in the beginning, I chalk it off as probably another clumsy attempt by the Chinese propaganda department. And let's face it, it was aimed mostly at the domestic audience, the Chinese youth.
Oh, 100% domestic. Like they didn't even bother to put out subtitles, right? It was very much meant to be a domestic production. I don't think they had the intention of internationalizing it, which is why I really had to take the initiative here, right? Like, too bad. I'm gonna make sure everyone sees, your propaganda, right?
I mean, no, it's great. It's great. I mean, like, I'm surprised that the anime didn't suck as I expected to, because I actually enjoyed it. Like I know people complain about the graphics, kind of the shaky CGI. I get that. But again, I watch. I didn't go watch a Karl Marx anime from China for for its amazing graphics. I think it was probably a function of like their timeline, their short timeline, and the budget. There was after everybody talked about it, I did notice there was kind of shaky transition from the 2D and to 3D animation.
Yeah, so I mean, and I looked into this too. So if you look at the end credits, there are two studios involved. There's like Dongmantang and there's like Wawa or something, and they also worked with like Inner Mongolia Film Bureau, which is based in like Ho I don't know if it's in like Huahalta or somewhere, but it's an Inner Mongolia based film studio, which I thought was pretty odd because it's definitely not a tier one city. So there are a lot of people involved, and I'm sure like the quality of animation is just probably not on par with like the major Japanese studios at right now. So all those things considered, I think it's fine. I'm by no means an anime aficionado, and I also admit I was watching this in like 10-second segments staring at the subtitles, so I don't think I might have picked up on a lot of this animation issues as other people have. But yeah, it's look, if it really bothers you, I guess that's understandable. But I agree. I think most people watching it aren't watching it, for the animation.
That's the amazing part is that how many people were excited about it outside of China. That's something I did not expect. The level of interest pouring in, and I must say I'm glad that overall they didn't do too bad of a job with the anime because it's mostly pretty faithful to the original material. And let's face it, it was aimed at the youth market. So we're not gonna get some like super deep penetrating analysis of Marxism. But overall, it does do a good job to like an introduction to Karl Marx's personal life, and just the history of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very it makes it very accessible, especially that scene in which Marx is explaining surplus value to the kid at the library. I thought that was a pretty good breakdown and overview of like what Marx is trying to outline in Capital. And yeah, overall, it took a lot of Marx's like very dry writings and condensed them down into some of the key principles there. And I think they did a very good job there. They clearly did their research. They shout out a lot of Marx's deep cuts, like his essay on Greek materialism and Prometheus, right? Like that's not something that you would necessarily cover even like in a college level class on Marxism. I think some of that stuff is definitely a little bit obscure. But they managed to call all that out in this too, which I think is pretty impressive.
I think that it's a function of the anime being sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party school. And so a lot of that's what they do, right? Their whole function was to study Marxism. So they know their source material pretty well. And, a lot of people in the West don't know about this, but actually the Chinese Communist Party school is known for a place where like people get to say the darnest things because this is like one of the paradox in China. Like it's a communist. So the Communist Party school in China are schools that's basically used for training of the communist cadres. So all the cadres have to go to the Communist Party school to get their the basic Marxist theory and stuff like that. So you basically have all these academics, eggheads, whose sole purpose is to study Marxism, but they surprisingly, get to discuss a lot of stuff. Like this is what surprised me about the anime itself, because people actually brought up about the anime, because a lot of things that were talked about in the anime, like exploitation of labor, the and even the censorship, even the government censorship, all these things exist in China today, right? And one of the fun thing for me was watching the Marx anime on Bilibili, the Chinese video sharing platform that's very popular with the young. And one of the features of Bilibili is they have this scrolling comment screen, so it allow people to comment in real time as they watch it. And the one of the fun thing about watching videos on Bilibili is you get to see what other people are saying each scene of the anime. And I must say I got a great kick out of it. I actually did a whole Twitter thread on this. Like people were saying the darndest things. Like there was a scene where Marx, when they opened a newspaper in Germany, and the local government is threatening to shut them down, and actually the local police came into the newspaper's office. They had a scene of confrontation where I guess the head of the police or the soldier, they threatened to pull out their gun. And at this point, the Chinese, some Chinese commentators were saying, shoot him, shoot Marx, so I don't have to study 2 years of this Marxist theory stuff. But there was another guy commenting soon after that. He's like, "Oh, you idiot! You think shooting Marx means you don't have to study his theories? It just means you have to study Hegel."
Yeah.
There was like more stuff like that. There was a part where when they're about to shut down the newspaper, and the Chinese commentator made some reference to the Peking University Marxist Society, right? You heard about the U.S. The Peking University Marxist Student Society, right? They tried to apparently try to organize workers in southern China, in Guangzhou somewhere, and they got busted by the authorities, and the so in the comment screens, the Chinese commenters, oh my God, this is just like the shutting down of the Peking University Marxist Student Society. What do you think about that? By the way, I like your take on it.
The Marxist Society.
Well, I mean the fact that about the okay, so let me put this in context, right? So right now, a lot of people it's a common refrain that modern China is a fascist dictatorship. Some people even call it the Nazi Germany, right? And these people are basically idiots. China is nothing like that. But having said that, there are some superficial similarities between China and Prussia. I'm not talking about the Nazi Germany. I'm talking about the first German Empire, under Bismarck and under the Kaiser, right? I mean, there are definitely some I say superficial similarity because, of course, there's a huge, wide gap of cultural difference that's separating the two. But in terms of suppression of dissent and in terms of development, Germany in the late 19th century was also a latecomer to industrialization. But after German unification, Germany was very quickly catching up to the previous world hegemon that was Great Britain, and which made Great Britain felt threatened, and that was kind of the underlying threat that eventually led to World War One. Like right now, we kind of have a similar dynamic going on between a rising China and also the current world hegemon United States that's feeling very unease and about the challenge posed by China. And also about Germany is that Prussia was an authoritarian state, right? On one hand, there's some progressive policies by Bismarck, for example. He implemented universal welfare system, and they instituted mandatory education.
Yeah, and Marx wrote an essay about these programs too, right? Critique of the Gotha program. So, yeah, it's okay. So I think there are a couple of topics here. We can talk about like the Peking Uni case specifically later, but I do want to talk more generally about the Bilibili comments, and I think, look, people say that there's so much censorship in China and that there's just no room for dissenting opinions. Well, I mean, the comments are the fact that people are expressing these things. They know what's going on. They know that there is also still exploitation in China, that there are bad working conditions there, that there are corrupt landlords, corrupt bosses. They know these things are going on. I mean, there's been, I think, like some 6,000 strikes in China in the last couple of years, probably even more than that. So, people are aware of these things are going on, and you see them express them not just on like these comments, but also on Weibo as well. Like, yeah, sometimes a topic gets too trending, the government will, delete it, but it's still there. People are aware of these things, and the anime.
On the same, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people in the West, they just assume, all the 1.3 billion Chinese are all these brainwashed robots, right? They just just regurgitate the government propaganda lines. And I know that's true, one, because I have lived in China for 13 years, and two, I still participate in the Chinese social media, both in Weibo and WeChat. And like you say, I know what people say about their government, and I know that people continue to criticize their government, and that people know what's going on, in China very quickly, especially in today's age of social media
Oh yeah.
and smartphone everywhere. And a lot of times, I mean, this is the feeling I still have today, ever since I came to the United States in 1990. I mean, people in China are more aware of what's going on in China and the outside world than, say, United States people in US know about China. Or in terms of world events, definitely, I think the educated Chinese elite are more aware than, say, the similar class of people of a similar class background in the United States. Usually there's always a kind of smug assumption on the side of, say the American liberals that they're the ones who know best. But it's really not true. It's really, really not true. Okay, go ahead. Back to you.
Oh yeah, and these the speed at which news spreads in China, like it means that the government also takes action much faster too. Like something like Flint, if you imagine that happening in China, like how fast there would be a resolution to that. Like what a few days ago it broke that in like Chengdu, number 7 experimental school, that the food vendor there was providing like moldy food to the kids. Immediately, in a massive protest, people figured out who the vendor was. People figured out what other schools this vendor is providing food for. I'm sure those people are in trouble. Like some people are going to face a lot of jail time for that, right? And I'm sure that vendor is done doing business like probably in China forever.
Oh yeah,
right? Like so, and that's just
they already. So I have seen on Chinese social media they're already. Someone took a shot of people taking down the company signs. I mean, they're done. That company's done.
so like it's actually a very responsive government to things like that. And in some cases, the local government will do something really stupid. They'll try to like squelch the protests. They'll try to like cover it up. But it's just never successful because like corrupt local officials, once it gets up high enough, once like the central government figures out what's going on, it's always the local government that's going to take the fall for this, right? Like usually they have no vested interest in protecting local corrupt officials. Like, hey, what are you doing? You're causing all this trouble, and it's just for like some petty corruption thing. Like, yeah, they're gonna get in trouble. Like, local officials found that it's very difficult to cover up like your abuses or things like that happen. So,
but I have to point out that censorship do exist. So in the case of Chengdu experimental number 7 experimental school, there was there were videos floating around on Chinese social media of basically the cops cracking down on the student parents protest. Some of the parents got pepper sprayed by the cops. Right. I mean, like that video was very quickly taken down on Weibo. I mean, it's still circulating on WeChat because, that's how I got them. And that's how I get to post them on Twitter. And now, some people are complaining under my Twitter comments. They say, "Oh, why do you post this? Like people are just going to use this to attack the Chinese government."
oh yeah, and that's exactly why the Chinese government takes them down, right? Look, like they have to resolve this situation, and they will. But that's exactly what they're thinking about the video too. Like, hey, who is this going to be used by? And so they're going to take it down. But yeah, it's out there, and I'm sure they understand that the internet is more or less forever. You can't delete those videos; they're still going to be around. All they're doing is just kind of controlling, like, I guess, the maximum circulation of it, right? Like it's still going to be known, especially for the people involved. But if it's a Sichuan issue, they would like to keep it contained to Sichuan at the very least.
Yes.
Right? Keep it a local issue.
because like Weibo is function more like Twitter, and what I noticed through my participation in Weibo is the crackdown on Weibo is a lot more stringent. Like they're very quickly to to put a kibosh on any kind of viral videos that would be perceived to have any like negative um, feedbacks. But at the same time, in WeChat, which is just a messaging tool, I don't know how to describe WeChat because really we don't have. It's kind of like WhatsApp basically, but with more features. So but on WeChat, those videos still exist, right? People are still passing the videos around. But because in WeChat it's small chat circles, right? Like you may be passing around in a group of hundreds or like a couple hundreds. It's not it's not like Weibo. Weibo, you post it out, you can go viral in like minutes. And then there was a case where a famous K-pop star, a Chinese, he was Chinese, but he was part of a K-pop band. Um, what's his name? It's like a really he has a really fresh, boyish face. Luhan, right? Luhan, because he's super popular in China, and he posted something on his personal Weibo that oh, now I have a girlfriend, right? I mean, that thing got reposted millions of times. It's so much so it crashed the entire Weibo system for like 30 minutes. I mean, it's crazy. So like the Chinese government are very sensitive about Weibo because the information can travel very quickly. Like they on WeChat less so. So information still does get around. Yes. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
But back to what we were talking about the superficial comparison between Prussia, which is during the Karl Marx's time, and the modern day China, because the argument can be made that both are authoritarian government, right? Both government are trying to protect the capitalist class, right? And they're trying to suppress dissent, right? I mean, like, so that there's a case, like we said, the Peking University Marxist society, right? They try to, so how China works is that China have this official union, right? They have the All China's Worker Union that has the backing of the government, right? But what Chinese government looked down is people to form like their own unions, like outside of the China Workers Federation. And I think this is what the Peking University Marxist Society got themselves involved with is one such case. They went down to a factory in Guangdong, and then they tried to organize, and that somehow rubbed off the authorities the wrong way. Like you said, like we discussed, even the Chinese commenters on watching the Marx anime made the association, right? So what is your take on that?
So, like, first of all, I want to say that it's very hard not to be sympathetic to the students in the original Peking Marxist society because, as you know, there is a new Marxist society at Beijing, and, there's a conflict between the old and the new, and, the old Marxist society, they did get off quite a few sick burns there, right? Because so we're going to descend into some Chinese puns here, but the short contraction for Marxist society is Ma Hui, which also is like horse organization. And they started calling the new Marxist society the Lu Hui, like the deer society, which is a riff on the 指鹿为马, or pointing to a deer and calling it a horse, right? So basically they're calling the new one like a fake Marxist society.
Do you want to tell the new original story about pointing a deer calling a horse?
So in very short, there was a corrupt official who was controlling the emperor, and to see where people's loyalties lie, he had a deer brought in front of all of them, and he would point to it and say, "Hey, this is a horse." And he would ask these
Hold
officials.
on, let me give it more broader context. So
Okay, sure.
this was the first dynasty that unified all China, the Qing dynasty, right? But immediately after the death of the first emperor, who have accomplished the task of unifying all China, the throne falls onto his uh, young son. But what really was the power behind the throne is this very powerful eunuch, Zhao Gao. And Zhao Gao, one of the things he does is to he would do all these things to test people's loyalties, to see if he has absolute power over everyone. So one of the things he would do is he had people bringing a deer, and he in front of the emperor he pointed the deer and call it a horse, and he just wait for people to respond. Basically, anyone who was just actually stood out and say, no, that's a you're full of shit, that's a deer, they will they will get purged, right? So of course people all try to go along with him and call the deer a horse. So this become like a famous idiom. Calling a deer a horse is like, you are trying to almost kind of shove something down people's throat, like by pointing like making up some obvious falsehood, right? Does that explanation work?
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear, and that's what they're accusing like the new, Peking University sponsored Marxist society of being, right? Of being a false Marxist society, and they do give quite a few good reasons. Like the new group is much more focused on like academic study, writing papers, dissertations, things like that, and they're a lot less involved with like the local workers at Peking University. They're not going out, not doing any activism. They just very content to stay in their classroom and talk about high-minded Marxist concepts and writings. And I think that all that is very fair, because the old Marxist society, they had a pretty good record. Like they would say, hey, they would talk to the janitorial staff at Peking University. They'd help them with small things, like even some small things like installing WeChat on their phones. Like that was one of the examples they give. So I think they're very fair to like criticize that. But moving part away from that, that's not really the real conflict here. It's more about why the original Peking Marxist Society got into trouble, and that's, as you said, they came down south to Guangdong. They decided to help workers at this company called JASIC. I actually forgot what they manufacture, but it's a manufacturer of some sort, and they were striking, and they're helping with that protest. And I think you pointed this out, but one of the things that made their protest different is that they wanted to form an independent union, one that's not affiliated with ACFTU, and they want to form their own independent union. And for a multitude of reasons, that's not something that's not allowed in China. The subject that's probably the most studied among senior members of the Chinese Communist Party leadership is the fall of the Soviet Union, and I'm sure things like solidarity in Poland, which was one of those quote unquote independent trade unions, is definitely something that they remember very clearly. That independent unions have been a tool for foreign governments in the past to exert influence and to destabilize a government. Like Solidarity, when it was first formed, it had like 10 million members. Like the leader, he talked about Margaret Thatcher. He's like, oh, I really admire Margaret Thatcher, for her great work. And this was like when Margaret Thatcher was cracking down on like striking Welsh coal miners. So, there's definitely some history there with independent unions. There's a reason there why they don't allow that. And I also want to point out that this was also a pretty unique demand by the JASIC workers. There are strikes all the time in China, and looking through a couple of them that are posted by China Labor Bulletin, I don't think that it's a very common request. I'm not really sure, why this was brought up by the JSIC workers. It just could be my unfamiliarity with the situation. But I do know that they originally had a request with ACFTU to unionize that was at first accepted, and then the acceptance was pulled for some reason, possibly to do with the protests. But I would say that I think that demand is the reason for this crackdown. There are so many strikes in China, and most of them get resolved relatively peacefully. In many cases, the workers aren't even punished for any damage that they may have caused. There's a fun case in 2009 in Jilin, which is right next to my dad's home province. But there was a steel company that they laid off a ton of workers, and they were going to take it private. And this was kind of during that big steel glut and the aftermath of the great global recession. And so the workers basically burst in to his executive's office. They actually beat him to death. And the police showed up, they had some tussles with the workers, but, they interviewed one of the policemen, and he's like, well, the guy did provoke them. He did say he was going to fire them, and no one ended up getting charged for that murder. The government actually stepped in and stopped the privatization because they decided it was a bad idea. So I do want to say that most strikes in China do get resolved. I think this one was unique in the response that the government had. My hypothesis is because they specifically requested for an independent trade union. I don't know what their rationale was there. But, that's, given that context there, I can see why that it had the response it did, and I am very sympathetic to the students there. I think they absolutely, the heart is in the right place. They have the best intentions. And it wasn't just the students. There are a lot of old workers, that had retired that came out in support of the workers and the students as well. It's a lot of worker-student relationships built there too. So,
it's hard not to be sympathetic to these students because they're just young and idealistic. In many ways, they kind of remind me of the students in the 1980s, in the lead up to the 1989 Tiananmen Square student protest. I mean, there's actually many people in the West actually don't understand about that the whole rationale behind the student test in 1989. That concludes part 1 of our interview with Feiyang, English translator of Chinese Karl Marx anime. Stay tuned next week for part 2 of the interview, where we talk in depth both about Karl Marx anime itself and Chinese politics. Or, if you rather not wait a week, head over to my Patreon page. Just search for Silk and Steel podcast in the Google search box. My Patreon page should either be the first or the second result. Or just head over to patreon.com. In the search box, type Silk. My page should be the first one in the result. I have posted the full episode for my subscribed patrons. For a monthly contribution of $5, you have full access to our premium content. You will always get the latest content first on the Patreon site. I hope you enjoy our show, and I hope you subscribe. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
别历经了贫穷和病痛，流离失所，失去了挚爱，也被世人不解和冷落。我不要在名利的光环下迷失自我，不忘初心，一往无前，点燃燎原之火，
让信仰引领不安的心。
这和马克思
为民营团结起来革命，
这和马克思
没有谁能熄灭我的热情。
这和马克思
为人类的解放生无真心，
这也和马克思。
尽管此刻我不被理解，你不懂我热爱的一切。